Well, let's see if that works. Seems to be holding steady. Hello, everyone. Now, we're not starting just yet. I'm saying hello because I'm running a little bit late. I'm running late because, well, for those who don't know, my sister had a bit of an accident yesterday. I'm running late because, well, for those who... And, gotta love her. She was just walking along the road and managed to faceplant. It takes skill. But my entire meal for the day has literally just come out the oven. Because all I've managed to get for myself, because I've been looking after everyone else, has been sausages, which have been cooked. So yes, we'll be starting properly in a bit, but I thought I'd say hello and start answering questions, if there's any questions. And also check the system was working, and check that that it was doing okay, dropped frames-wise, and, you know, signal-wise, and everything was working as it was supposed to be. We can always hope. I have no idea whether it's right what BT's doing, but the BT system... BT keep deciding what they're going to do, keep saying different things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And we'll hope everything works well today, and unlike Sunday. No. I have tried to up the bitrate to 9,000 though, which should help, but also is going to strain the upload speed dramatically. So yeah, we'll see how things go. BT is as bad a thing as BT. Honestly, if you've got broadband fibre from BT, you're probably okay. If you're on copper wire like I am, then you've got an issue. I should probably pay for business rates, but they already charge me some regions of £150 a month. And, yeah. No, you cannot have my sausages. I did you your dinner. You've had your food. You don't get my food as well. No matter how cute you look. Sorry, for those who don't realise, and I'm not sure if the camera is showing him, let me do. We take this down just a tad. You will see that there is a poodle who is very, very, very interested in my sausages right now. Today we're talking about the Battle of Cartagena, the Indies, which is one of those times which is a very rare battle in naval history, because it's a loss which the British don't talk about and don't examine endlessly. Mostly because the loss is actually so stupid. Hello. Don't get me started on how much of a daylight robbery BT is. Please note, in total for internet services and everything else, I pay support to pay the internet services, to pay for the Starlink as well as the BT internet here, to pay for all the costs. I have, you know, the voice over internet, phone line system, etc. It probably costs the house roughly £250 a month. Hello, Leslie. Now, I'm not sure how the drop frames are coming through to you all. Whether you're getting a lot of drop frames or you're not getting many, I don't know. Oh, the advantage BT have in this part of the country is they literally have a monopoly. There is literally very little other options. You have BT or BT. That's good. Then it's all going well as far as you're concerned. Then that's all good. Hello, Macho Man, Adam Savage, and Senator Canero, TG40. Hello, everyone. So, before anyone asks, these are plain pork sausages which I could get delivered quickly. I am that lazy. I'm going to have a long phone call with BT about upload speed tomorrow. But we will see. We will see. So, about time to start, aren't we? Now, let me just expand this a little bit that way, so I have a little bit more space. I got a Kindle today, ready for your book. Thank you, Stephen Richards. That should be good. I'm planning on... I've worked out the pricing range for it and all those things, so... yeah, it'll be good when it comes out. But believe it or not, yesterday was supposed to be another editing day. And it said yesterday I spent 9.5 hours in A&E. But she's okay. She's okay, and that's the important thing. Channel, there is a myth in Spain that the King of England, on hearing of the result of battle, forbade historians from writing on it and how embarrassing it was. Not quite. It's honestly, the reason it probably doesn't get covered much by British historians is... well, how do I put this? We like to pretend that Gallipoli is the only time we've had a muck-up of amphibious warfare of that proportions. The trouble is, we can go back for about 3 or 4 of them. And the Battle of Cartagena in Indias is arguably the second of those. Where the second time, where we basically told them so many times we were coming, that they had got prepared by the time we arrived, and we found ourselves in a losing situation. I will say this about YouTube. They've removed my ability to make the adverts every 30 minutes. In terms of the monetization, they are supposed to be every... they are now, it says now, it doesn't say frequency every 30 minutes. It says estimated frequency every 30 minutes. That catch-all phrase, estimated. So that being said, though, we are at 7:45. We are at the official start time. So let's start. So this is all part of the War of Jenkins' Ear. I kid you not. Now, sometimes, because historians prefer to refer to the war, refer to it as the War of the Austrian Succession, because that sounds better. Hello, Daisy. They prefer to say that, it's the War of the Austrian Succession. But there's a small problem with calling it the War of the Austrian Succession. The War of the Austrian Succession doesn't kick off till December 1740. The War of Jenkins' Ear kicks off in October 1739. But the thing is, the War of Jenkins' Ear is pretty much an Anglo-Spanish war. The War of the Austrian Succession, if you go and look that up, involves everybody. Basically, the War of the Austrian Succession involves France, Prussia, Spain, Bavaria, Saxony, Sardinia, Genoa, Sweden, the Jacobites and Duchy of Modena on one side, the Habsburg monarchy, Britain, Hanover, Dutch Republic, Saxony, Sardinia, and Russia on the other side. You're thinking some of those people I mentioned twice. Yes, they were. They changed sides. Don't remind us, once you get to 100,000 subscribers, Doctor, you get your own YouTube representative to help with your issues. I'm not sure. I don't know if Drac has his own representative yet, and he's nearly at 500,000. I'm not sure if they're that generous anymore. How many wars have Spain and England had already? Don't ask me questions like that. That's like asking how many wars have we had with the French. It's kind of like how they're saying, how long is a coastline? The closer you start to examine it, the more you find. Hey, for this dude. Yeah. So, the thing is, the War of Jenkins' Ear is probably one of those wars which, Lord help us, it comes about mostly because they just need a scrap. Honestly, when you start to look at it, both sides are gunning for it and are really doing things which are provocative. And the really funny thing is, until about the 1880s, 1890s, most historians believed that the name of the war was entirely political, and the entire story of Captain Robert Jenkins, who gets his ear cut off, was a myth. A political myth. The reality turns out to be very different when John Knox Lawton, who was the historian who the department at King's College London is named for, and who I've mentioned in other videos recently, went and did some research and found out, goodness gracious me, they've actually been talking about it. They've actually talked about this battle. And that was the first thing that scared people. Okay, they've actually talked about these events. It's when you find a quote from an admiral, which literally states, and this was the admiral in Jamaica at the time, so you'd presume he'd know. About the 20th of April last, sailed out of NS, the ship he was talking about, sailed out of your harbour in one of those Garda Costas. I met a ship on this island bound for Britain. And after using the captain in a most barbarous, inhumane manner, and taking all his money, cutting off one of his ears, blundering him of those necessities which were to carry the ship safe home. Yeah. And that was a letter written by a Royal Navy Rear Admiral to a Spanish governor, complaining about it. It got to formal complaint level right at the time. And this just goes on for years. And Robert Walpole does his best to ignore it. He really does. Because he doesn't want a war with Spain, if he can avoid it. He doesn't want a war at this point, because he doesn't need a war with Spain. Wars cost money. He's got some peace going on. It's kind of nice. It's nice to have a bit of peace. Yeah, you know, that there are other things going on. There's always the French. There's always problems with them. The moment at this point, though, he's got some quite quiet with the Spanish. You know, it's peaceful. It's peaceful. And well, he tries his best to ignore it. Now, I think probably this event, which is pictured here, of taking place in the House of Commons, of Jenkins showing his mutilated ear to Walpole, while Walpole's colleagues spend their time more concerned with women, wine, and, well, whatever those two at the back are doing. I don't know. Wandering, let's say. Probably didn't happen. Honestly, probably didn't happen. And to give you an example, Captain Jenkins was probably involved in smuggling, but he was also someone who was quite, how do I put this politely? He was quite trusted in many, many ways. He was a good and he was a respected master mariner. He would, after this incident, would end up being employed by the East India Company, who do not employ bad captains. For some reason, a company which so dependent on the goods getting around the world were very picky about which captains they hired. It's amazing. You'd wonder if, maybe these days companies, if they were involved in international trade, might want to be as focused as the East India Company, for all its bad faults, was very focused on making sure it had good crews, it had enough crew aboard, it had officers who had good training, and enough of them, to make sure it got its goods around the world, because ultimately it makes money by those goods getting there. And skimping on that, and maybe losing those goods in transit, causes a loss, which is not a good thing. So the East India Company, for all their very many, many bad points, basically private empire, were actually very efficient at making sure they had good captains. So the fact that Jenkins goes and works for them suggests he's pretty darn good. Even better than that, perhaps, if you consider as this is sort of an endorsement, is that in 1741 he's sent as part of the East India Company to St. Helena to investigate charges of corruption that was against the acting governor. And because they were found to be true, he exercised his powers which he'd been granted, and from May 1741 till March 1742, he actually administers the affairs of the island as its acting governor until a new governor turns up, and then he returns to the sea. He takes part in notable convoys. He is a very well-paid master mariner. There were lots of discussions between the governments about the effects of the Coast Guard. The trouble is, honestly, whilst the British Coast Guard didn't seem to, the British equivalent in that out there in the Royal Navy didn't seem to cut off anyone's ears in mutilation, there were enough gentlemen mariners sailing ships of, what should we say, negotiable virtue? Ships of negotiable virtue, i.e. smuggling ships, that, frankly, the Spanish weren't too keen on the British. And honestly, Jenkins was probably sailing a smuggling vessel. But the trouble was, the Spanish didn't have enough merchant vessels to satisfy the need of their own colonies. And this is one of the reasons why, and their argument to try and satisfy the need was to get all protectionist and put in rules and laws forbidding them to trade with other people, to try and keep the money internally. The trouble is, the people who have to enforce those rules are the people who live there. See, Clarke, EIC, corruption, surely not. Actually, again, the East India Company, for many things, was actually not that corrupt. Mainly because, again, corruption hurts the bottom line. They don't mind corrupting other people, but the company itself must never be corrupt. They were, again, brutal with that. There is a level of corruption because of the period we're talking about. I've talked about this before. Patronage, there is a sort of level of corruption within the patronage system, etc. But there is a difference between what's considered an acceptable level of corruption and a level of corruption which is going to result in a violent demise of your life, your prospects, if not your life. And it's when you cross that line, that's when you get into trouble. So, this is the War of Jenkins Ear. The War of Jenkins Ear happens mostly because of the relationship of Spain with its colonies and what's going on. Now, what I would say is interesting to me. Usually the strategic, and I'm going to talk about this now, but you'll see this as it goes through. Strategic thing that comes out of this is the idea that Spain secures their colonies and the British are defeated. I would argue the sort of thing that comes out of this is that the British shift their argument from going, hang on, those colonies are mature enough. We can't simply go in and take over. They are defended enough, all these things. But they have a load of locals who are really annoyed. So let's start funding them. This is one of the reasons why the South American independence movement gets started a little bit earlier than the North American independence movement. The people funding it have more money and more ships. It's always an advantage to have more money and more ships. And so, with that being said, there is something which is included in this, which is a pretty good thing for the war effort, which shows the capabilities of the Navy, which shows the capabilities of Britain in its abilities, which shows the capabilities of, of naval power that is being created. That's Anson's voyage around the world. At that point, Commodore. Later on was to be Admiral, but at this point, Commodore George Anson. He's a squadron of 8 ships: Centurion, Gloucester, Severn, Pearl, Wagner, Wager, and Tyrol, and 2 supply ships, Anna and Industry. Now, the thing is, the example I usually give from this when I start talking about this is the War of the Jenkins Ear is notable for the very poor performance of British amphibious warfare. In fact, it collapses at almost every turn. And one of the things that does come out of it dramatically for Britain is a big change in the philosophy of how you approach amphibious warfare, how you command it, how you organize it. And there's a lot of expense. There are a lot of lessons learned in blood in this war. There are a lot of lessons learned in blood. It's scary how much lesson is learned in blood in this war. When I start talking about lessons learned in blood, there are certain wars I think of. The War of Jenkins Ear is one of them. Those are wars where you suffer brutal repeated losses, mostly because of repeating the same mistakes, until you learn not to do it. Honestly, if you want a war which is a good example of Britain getting its face kicked in repeatedly, the War of Jenkins Ear is a good one. And it's not getting its face kicked in by the enemy, it's stepping on a rake. And usually it's one of the rakes that's put it down its own way. It is a brutal scenario for any nation to go through. And I would say it's a lesson which, sadly enough, governments haven't really learnt enough of over the years. Now, I will also say this video might not be the longest of my lives. I'm going to give you all that heads up now. But I will be on Discord afterwards. But the thing is, with both Mum and Karen being ill, this actually worked out quite well for me as the live for this evening, because I could have added a load of extra stuff in and made it into a 3-hour live. Or I could leave it for the battle, pure, and do some of the context, enough of the context for it to make sense, and get it done in roughly 2 hours. And that seemed to be more sensible, because I'm going to have to make sure both of them take their pills and get to bed on time, honestly, at the moment, because one has made themselves ill by falling over, and one of them tried to race a wheelchair. They're both children. They are both children. But I will be on Discord. I will just, between the two, pop off and sort them out and then be back on Discord afterwards to answer questions. So, Anson's voyage is a good example of where the amphibious warfare of this starts to go wrong, because he's supposed to be supplied with 500 soldiers. He's promised 500 great soldiers, because he's going to be attacking the Spanish colonies on their Pacific side. He literally sails around the world. Literally sails around the world. And that's what he's being charged to. And everyone knows he's being charged to do that. So he's promised 500 soldiers. He's given 500 invalids from the hospital at Chelsea. Now, before you start thinking of the Chelsea pensioners like we have today, you're not far off it. Okay, so be a Chelsea pensioner. You are either too old to continue serving, too weak to continue serving, or only capable of doing light duties. At best. Light duties doesn't really include heavy fighting. Light duties doesn't include what he wants the soldiers for. Well, yeah. That's what he gets given. And only roughly 250 of them actually board his ships. A goodly number of them were stretchered aboard the ships by their comrades. Most of the ones who were fitter and healthier, scarpered. So they had to be replaced. And the Admiralty, for some reason at that point, much to the dishonour of the army, and caused huge trouble, for some reason had no faith in the army supplying them with troops, and preferred to recruit people straight into the Marines and take them with them. Which immediately led to people pointing out, well, those Marines had never fired a gun, never been given any drill. And honestly, Anson and the naval officers preferred to take them with them because they'd train them aboard ship and hopefully they'd work out. But if they didn't, they'd still be younger, fitter and healthier than what the army was prepared to give them. And in some ways, actually, the balance of experience of the ones who stayed and who were, of the invalids who were actually interested in it, they had enough skill and experience to actually help train those Marines. And they did. And so he does quite a successful voyage around the world. He does quite a successful, quite a glorious operation. You know, it certainly makes his name. Will you stop trying to edge towards my sausages? You're not getting them. Down. I love you dearly. Down. I don't know. Poodles. So, yeah, you have this voyage by John Anson going around, but this tells you there's a problem going on. You see, most of the army officers come from the Walpole faction, who really didn't want a war. Why didn't they want a war? Well, to be honest, there are some good reasons for not wanting a war. But mostly they didn't want a war because any war was likely to favour the Navy. And if the Navy won more victories, then it was going to see the Army's position suffer even more, they felt. Because the Army was always playing second fiddle pretty much to allies. Since the days of Marlborough, when they'd been successful out on the field as, at the front, they were now no longer there. They had allies. And even when they took part in naval operations and were storming places in the Caribbean, the Navy got the credit. It's upset them. And they wanted a European war against France, which they could invade. They didn't not want a war, they just didn't want a war which was about colonies. Of course, France had colonies, but they thought they could invade France. There are some very interesting army officers at this time. Just leave it be. Some really interesting army officers. But they didn't get their way. Walpole got basically forced to war because the opposition kept using Jenkins' Ear and other incidents against him. And eventually he decides he's going to launch a punitive expedition. Which is part of what Anson's after doing. Partially, this whole world cruise is about a punitive expedition. It's also about showing the Spanish that the British can turn up. What's really fun is, if you think about it, if Anson had ended up getting the wrong channel and going a bit further south, he might have found something very interesting. Because the track of his ship, Centurion, it's not far off, is it? Now, the Caribbean, though, was the focus. Or Caribbean, Spanish, South America. They were interested in Cuba. But here, you might notice there's a problem going on here. You might notice a small issue. We're talking about Cartagena de Indias. The key port. The key economic hub, in many ways, for Spanish territories in South America, in that area. And one of the key ports because, well, it's one of the most defensible. And the British turn up on the 13th and 20th of March, 1740. They turn up. And they do quite well. Admiral Vernon turns up. Admiral Vernon likes Cartagena. And they can both, basically, he considers Spanish gold shipping to be the prime objective. That's what they're primarily afterwards. And, you know, that's where Cartagena in Indias comes in, is what is important. And he turns up. He undertakes what's called a reconnaissance in force of the city. He took several ships of the line. He took some fire ships. He took some bomb vessels, some transport ships. And he lands there, starts landing some men to do some mapping and reconnoiter their positions. And what have you got in your ear? And after he's done that, you know, with no reaction from the Spanish, on the 18th of March, 1740, he sends the bomb vessels in to open fire on the city. Now, he was trying to provoke a response. He was trying to see what their defensive capabilities would be. And, well, the Spanish commander looked at it and said he wouldn't immediately respond. In fact, what he did was he started removing guns from some of his ships, and he used them to form a temporary shore battery to make the fortifications look stronger than they were. Then Vernon carried out an amphibious assault. But there was strong resistance, and so, you know, they'd only been attempting to land 400 soldiers, and it was unsuccessful. And he carries on bombarding for, 3 days. Nothing really works, nothing really happens, but he's gathered a lot of information. And so then he leaves Windsor Castle and Greenwich there, 2 of his ships, to intercept any Spanish ship that might approach, but basically leaves and goes off. Now the thing is, you might be thinking, hang on, Alex, he can't go that far, because a couple of days later, not very long, he goes and destroys the fortress of San Lorenzo at the Riel. Yeah, and he does. This is the fortress in Panama. And it's near modern-day Portobello. And it was defended by patrol boats and armed with only 4 guns and 30 soldiers. So frankly, if it hadn't been destroyed by the force which Vernon sends to destroy it, you'd be slightly worried, because they turn up with 4 ships of line, a frigate, the Diamond, 3 bomb vessels, 2 fire ships, and some transports. They land troops, they do everything they need to do. Do you know what Sunder Bright Spark then has? An idea. And that bright idea comes from Vernon. Now, honestly, Admiral Vernon is not my favourite of the British admirals in history, because around him he can be very good, but he also has so many bright ideas. And his next bright idea is on the 3rd of May 1740. He returns to Cartagena de Indias with his flagship, Princess Caroline, 13 warships, and his aim is to bombard the city again, but he finds that there are 6 ships of the line the Spanish have there are deployed in such a way, such a manner, that the British fleet, if it was to engage, was forced into ranges where they could only make short or long shots, and so couldn't do much damage to the city. And so Vernon has to withdraw, asserting that the attack was another feint, another manoeuvre, another test. So let's think about that. In 1740, he turns up at Cartagena de Indias twice. This is a critical port for the Spanish. It is a critical port. It is a critical place for their trade. You've turned up there twice within the space of 3 months. And then you leave it for 12 months? And you think you're going to come back and find it in the same state it was before? There you go. Cleaned your eye for you. It's unlikely to be the case, is it? It's unlikely to be the case. You know, this is Gallipoli. This is so many of the. I said there are about 4 of these battles, and this is one of the reasons why we don't study it, because the British, whilst we like learning from our defeats, we don't like to mention the fact that we sometimes repeat the same thing several times in a row. In fact, I would say, if you want to be really disturbed, would do another one of attacking once, twice, and then turning up later with the full force and going, wow, you're ready for us? Oh, wow, we didn't realise it. You're a good boy. Shades of the Dardanelles. Shades, it's a repetition of the Dardanelles. In some ways, it's worse. In some ways, it's worse, because the battle we're going to be discussing, as I said at the beginning, you might notice, is in 1741. It's literally a year later. It's the next year. They attack in March and May 1740. You know, you always helped the Spanish out whenever I played Total War on Sundays, didn't you? So you're just, you're just happy your Spanish friends are winning. Okay, alright. will reach up and get you a bicky. Seeing as that's when you're going and you notice it's PT time. Down, get. Down. Good boy. We're cutting in at the... Our today's topic. First of all, shameless book plug. Now, thank you everyone who supports the channel. Thank you everyone who shares and likes, shares and subscribes to the videos. Thank you everyone who does all the help with those things. It really does help. It really does make things better. And thank you everyone who is as helpful as they are. Honestly, this channel wouldn't be anywhere where it is without you. And I wouldn't be producing books. There wouldn't be more coming without your support. Because, yeah. It's because of the support of this channel I have that I have enough. I'm able to put the days I can do into research. I'm a contract lecturer in universities. I do consultancy work, all those things. They're great things, but they don't fund research time. They don't fund the ability to go off and write books. They just literally are about funding living and supporting the things you need to do to live in the world. It's thanks to the funding from this channel, which does fund purchasing more books and getting more things. Something which I think you'll find interesting, some of you, will be this book, which recently I got a new copy of, because my old copy had been borrowed by a student. That's the other thing, being a lecturer, you do lose copies of books to students. The Economic Development of Japan, 1868 to 1941, by W.J. McPherson. And it is really quite short. It's basically what I would call a primer on the subject. It's kind of like what I'm trying to write my books to be, but like 45,000 words. This one's less than 45,000 words, I think, but it's worth a read. If you want an introduction to Japanese economics over a 73-year period prior to World War II, this is a good introduction, especially for those people who maybe not be economists. Do not, Leslie, do not allow enemy to understand your weaknesses. First rule of sword. Oh, yeah. No, what's your medical opinion on wheelchair racing? Look, in a nice way, she's got a blue wheelchair with Go Faster stripes. We all knew it was coming. Technically, it's a push wheelchair as well, so technically it's not powered. Please note the way I'm saying technically and technically here. Anyway, thank you for your support. Thank you for helping the channel grow, and thank you for everyone who's buying copies of books and things like that. It really does help. So, when we get into this, we need to talk about the commanders involved. Because, believe it or not, the third attack on Cartagena de Indias, which is what this is about, the Battle of Cartagena de Indias, takes place between the 13th of March and 20th of May, 1741. So you know they attacked in March and May in 1740? The actual battle we're talking about is March to May, 1741. So pretty much 12 months. YouTube ads during his own. I know, Charles, it's just, there is a level of beauty going on there. Now, the British commanders. The overall commander was a guy called Lord Charles Cathcart, who was a general. Unfortunately, Cathcart had this annoying thing. Like a lot of senior officers in this mission, he dies en route. Please note, he's this one. Literally here. Now, Cathcart was many things. Many things. A good military officer? Probably not. But he wasn't a bad one either. The thing is, he was appointed expeditionary commander and he was supposed to be over Anson and the one commanding and in charge of the operations. But he died on his passage out to the Americas in 1740. He's buried in Portsmouth, Dominica. There's a monument there to his memory, apparently. And the thing is, he's dead. And the trouble is, when he dies, that means the senior officer, realistically, becomes this gentleman. Vice Admiral of the Blue, Edward Vernon, who is a dominant personality. For the time, he could be called an adequate admiral, but the thing is, if you're going to pull off this when you've done it twice, you need a great admiral. You need an absolutely brilliant admiral, and you need a very decent general. His second in command, by the way, is Captain Sir Charles Knowles. There are various officers who are theoretically supposed to be Vernon's second in command, but the only one who actually can stand up to him is Knowles. The only one who actually seems to ever get him to listen to them is Knowles. So, Captain Knowles is who we're going to consider his second in command. Also, every time Vernon has an independent command he has to send off, and he theoretically has a choice. Send off a rear admiral or make Knowles a commodore. He makes Knowles a commodore. Every single time. So yeah. There's something going on here. Now, the land commanders. Oh, they're fun. They really are fun. The guy who looks really stylish up here is who takes over after, in black and white sort of thing, is called Lieutenant General Thomas Wentworth, who takes over as the Land Forces commander after Cathcart dies. But, and please note, he's not senior enough to start telling Vernon what to do. And Vernon's not seen enough to realistically tell him what to do. But he can dominate him personality-wise, because the man is I would love to say an effective general, but he really isn't that great. He certainly tries his best. He certainly tries his best. He doesn't live. He only lives till 1747, so he lives through this bit. But we're gonna get into some fun next, because you might notice I have some more officers up there. I do. I have some more, and well, you see, some of these officers are bringing troops from America, and you have. How do I put this politely? General Spotswood is what his technically name is, the governor of Virginia. Now, that's that gentleman over in the top left of the screen. He dies. He was to be second in command under Cathcart. He was supposed to be second in command of the army under Cathcart and of the whole force under Cathcart, and he dies. So both 4 stars on this trip have died, okay? Hence, the Lieutenant General's now in charge, and the Vice Admiral is now in charge of pretty much everything. And so, the ground forces, realistically, one of their more aggressive commanders, you wouldn't know to look at him, but he is, and who takes pretty much over, is Colonel William Gooch, who's at the top of this line, above Anson. And he is the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. So they had both the Governor and Lieutenant Governor of Virginia coming on the trip. This is only getting better. It is just, there are just so many reasons to not look at this battle, but there are so many reasons you do need to look at it. So, you've had, the senior command have basically died. The ones left in command are the ones who are not really suited to the job. And even better, their instructions from home are so vague because they didn't know, because they didn't really want them to go. The Walpole government gave them vague instructions and left it up to the commanders at the scene. Unfortunately, the commander's dead, so they have a council of war in Jamaica and make some decisions about what to do. C-Team! No, this is theoretically at least the B, if not the B team. But the trouble is, it's a B team who don't know who's in charge and don't want to talk with each other. And the only decent relationships you have going on are possibly the discussions going on between Knowles and Gooch. Knowles and Gooch, to an extent, seem to get on. But it's a nightmare. This is literally a how not to run a war. A, you've left the command structure vague and no accounting for what happens if people die. B, you've left the instructions vague, so no one really knows what they want to do, or what they've got to do, so they can do whatever they want. And C, and here is probably the worst thing, you have given them a very fine force to go off and do this with. We'll be getting into the fleet later, but theoretically, Vernon's in charge of 25% of the active warships of the British Navy in this for this operation. 25% of the active warships of the Royal Navy are assigned to Vernon. Think about that. Rum? These men don't drink rum. That's far too weak for them. We are talking about 18th century nobles here, Runon. Or rather, 18th century noble here, 18th century nobles here, New IKB 4472. These men do not drink rum. They drink the finest brandy and whiskey. And the trouble is, again, a lot of the officers have died. Thomas Wentworth ends up in charge because basically he's the senior general left alive. It's not because he's necessarily good or bad. He's just the only one still having a pulse. And Spotswood, who was technically a major general, but had been, because he was a governor and commander of the American forces, was going to be second in command, had died as well. And when you know there's things going on when they're talking about generals, they're being replaced by colonels. And is it through enemy action? No. And please note, they're dying before they even reach the Cartagena area. We know how bad South America is for dysentery and disease. Well, they ain't even got there and they're already dying at this point. And then on the Spanish side, we have the Governor-General of Cartagena, Admiral Bias de Lozo Oliveira, who is the guy who won the first time. And the second time, with careful manoeuvring, and was pretty darn capable. And technically, he is second in command. Sebastian de Silva Lasagna, who is the Viceroy of New Granada. So you have the Governor General of Cartagena is there himself, and the Viceroy of New Granada. But realistically, Leza has been spending the last year doing everything he can to improve his fortifications. Everything he can. He has raised his forces. He has got everything ready. He can do it. He has built forts. He has built batteries. He has done everything he can do to get it in good condition. The Mado Hombre, he lost prior to the battle in active service, an eye, a hand, and a leg. Yeah. This guy has been through wars repeatedly. So has this guy. They are also survivors of Spanish politics at that point, which basically, if you can survive Spanish politics at this point, it's kind of like saying you survived the streets of Ankh-Morpork in Terry Pratchett's Discworld. You survive on those streets, you've got some skills. You've got some skills. My goodness, this is like the movie where a destroyer ends up with an ensign played by Jerry Lewis as the captain, and they literally lose him on a mission to tell Japanese war was over. The Japanese did return him. Yeah. There are just so many things going wrong. So many things going wrong with us. Ankh-Morpork or the Shades? Well, the Shades are probably, let's be honest, more like the Ankh-Morpork. The Shades are a level above. The Shades are probably Italian politics at this point. Bob the Builder couldn't fix this. Sorry, Steve. I know you believe Bob the Builder can fix anything, but he couldn't fix this. But these two had certainly been Bob the Builder. They had been doing everything they could. They couldn't get a lot of troops out of Spain. They couldn't get a lot of reinforcements out of Spain. But they had a lot of gold, and they had a lot of natives, and they had a lot of good engineers, and including some Italians specialized in fortifications. And they were prepared to spend. They were prepared to spend. So let's consider the forces involved. The British force. Over 200 ships total. Over 200 ships. We're not quite sure how many, because there are roughly 120 transport ships alone and 50 merchant ships, of which 40 are brought by the Americans. There are fire ships, bomb ships, 2 hospital ships, 22 frigates, and 29 ships of the line. So, by my count, before we get into the fire ships and bomb ships, which we're not quite sure the numbers of, because some of them apparently were converted merchant ships, and some of the transports were supposed to be used as fire ships, just to make life confusing, I would say we're looking at conservatively 240 ships out there. The land forces were roughly 12,000 troops. 6,000 newly raised Marines, 2 regular British Army regiments, the 15th and 24th Foot, and 3,600 colonial troops from America. When you start to consider that, you've pretty much worked out that the 2 regiments of foot are bringing roughly 1,200 troops each. This is a lot of force. Okay? This is a lot of capability. They're relying on the warships to provide artillery support. That's fine. They are taking some artillery officers with them, though. They are pretty well, equipped as they can be. The 6,000 newly raised Marines, well, Anson just had to do the same thing, and that's the Royal Navy not relying on the British Army to supply the troops. Please note, originally the Army were supposed to supply more troops. Originally there was supposed to be roughly 6,000 coming from America, and originally there was supposed to be another 2 regiments coming from the British Army, and it was supposed to be even more troops than it was historically. But still, they are taking 12,000 troops and roughly 25% of the active Royal Navy warships and a huge number of stores and supply ships. On paper, this force is unfreaking stoppable. Hello, channel. Also important to note that Spain had, about 2 decades ago, finished the War of Spanish Succession, and the Castilian crown was recuperating manpower after exhausting a lot under the Habsburg dynasty and forcing the Aragonese crown to comply with the new Bourbon order, whether they liked it or not. Or recuperating manpower. Yeah, it's true. That's one of the reasons why the Spanish can't send a lot of troops. They can't, but it's not just politics. It's not because they don't want to, it's because they don't have them. Now, this is a force which should, on paper, be capable. Should, on paper, be capable. No. Let's think about this again. 29 ships to the line. Great. That's great. But are you going to fight a massive naval battle? No. You need a lot of artillery, though, just in case the Spanish fleet shows up. But you've got a very big fleet here. And you've got a vice admiral on the in charge of it all. "22 frigates. All useful things to have. It's going to allow you to dominate the ocean around it. And dominate the area. But what you need are a lot of bomb ships and a lot of bomb ships to try and support the army ashore. 2 hospital ships. With all those supplies and everything, you'd actually think on paper it's going to be well equipped. They shouldn't be suffering from lack of food. They shouldn't be suffering from lack of support. And again, we've got to think about that force: 12,000 troops, 6,000 newly raised Marines, 2 regular army regiments, and 3,600 colonial troops from America. They have been trained to vastly different standards. And the army commander who was put in charge of them, who's going to bring them all together, is dead. He was the force commander. And this is shifted from being a joint command, which is actually what they do. In the future, they seem to move to where it's a joint command. They don't put a general in charge or an admiral in charge. They make it a joint command. And they have a clear line of who's second in command, who's third in command, who the order of seniority is, and they all have to know the plan. This is one of the things that comes out of this war. When you start to look through British amphibious operations after this, they have a clear model of how to do it. They don't always follow it. Don't mistake me here. I'm not saying they always manage to follow it. I'm saying they have a plan and they have a model of how to do it. I wish they always followed it, but, you know, life is never that simple or that nice. We're talking about the British forces here. You know, that would be... They're always following a good plan. Oh, good lord. Good lord. How many brigandines were in this battle? Don't get into that. It just... Yeah, it's just interesting, this battle. Okay? It's just interesting. It is just interesting. That is all we can really go for. It is interesting. Now, let's see. What's this force being sent to fight, theoretically? And theoretically, by the way, the aim they were supposed to be doing under Lord Carhart, you must remember, was actually to descend on Havana first. They were supposed to take Havana first and then go Cartagena, the Indians. But guess what? Carhartt's dead. Vernon's in charge. Vernon, I want Cartagena de Indias. They defeated me twice last year. Twice! I will take them this time! Vernon. He's such a tryhard. Now, the Spanish defenders, they have some very nice, interesting little forts built up. Some sort of, not quite star forts. I don't know, it theoretically looks like a star fort, but it's actually not. It's more of a sort of artillery fort with diamond fort star fort pretensions. But it was built. Well, there's a debate as to whether or not how many regulars they actually have. That's a fun thing to know. The debate is, it could be 2,700, it could be 3,000. Some historians go for approximately 2,850. I decided to go with approximately 2,850 because that gives you a good idea. It's approximately 2,850. But it could be as many 3,000, it could be as little as 2,700. The regulars come from the Aragon and España regiments. The Toledo, Lisbon, and Navarre regiments don't arrive till October 1740. But they've still been there a few months. They have a colonial regiment, raised in Cartagena itself, 5 companies of militia, 600 Indian archers and sailors, a total force of some region of 6,000. Including the crews of the 6th ship of the line. And of course they've built fortifications. Now, here is the thing. There is often a misunderstanding when it comes to fortifications, and I'm going to be getting into this later on because I have a feeling this video is going to be in my future. Fortifications are not built. To prevent you ever being taken. The fortifications are built to raise the price and the cost of taking a place. So you don't attempt it unless you are able to match that price and absorb that cost. And also to make it take you a long time to take that place, because time tends to defeat more sieges than anything else. The longer a siege takes, the more likely enemy reinforcements are to show up, the more likely a relieving force to show up, the more likely pieces to be sued for, the more likely disease is going to ravage the attackers. Often, think about this. The defenders, yes, are going to be living in squalid conditions, but they're squalid conditions with roofs and buildings that they can keep warm and probably some sort of sense of hygiene and some sort of facilities. The attackers are going to be in temporary accommodations. They're going to be in tents. They're going to be in mud. They're going to be in sludge. They're going to be in a rainforest. They're going to be in swamp. It's not going to be good. So, what you do when you're building fortifications, part of them is you have to look at it going, am I building this to defend this, to try and stop this enemy attacking me, or am I building it to buy me time when they attack me? And honestly, you're more often better doing the buying time thing. And that's actually what the Spanish have gone for here. They've gone to make it as complicated as possible. There are as many forts as possible that the British are going to have to take. There are as many lines of defense as possible as the British are going to have to take. Yeah, it's a very, very... Drew Petrin, you could be right, it's a very basic star fort, but it's also... if you call a star fort, people have visions of certain things, and it's not that. It is a colonial fortification with star fort theories. Actually, if you've ever played Total War, and you get the basic fortification structure, Build the basic fort, not the advanced fort, which is the far big one. This is pretty much what you get. It's what they have, and it's going to maximize their personnel, because if you think about it, taking a fort is always going to require a lot more personnel to take than to defend, because that's the basic point you design it for. But also, you have to take them. You have to take them. Unless you can come up with a way of storming Cartagena from the seaside, you have to take the forts. You have to take the fortifications. You have to manage to you have to get through them. You can't get round them from the land side. You have to take the fortifications. Does it have one of those blockhouse redoubts around it? Yeah, they have interesting things. It's mostly the accommodations are built into the walls in this one. So that being said, and that being the case, the mission is Cartagena. And if you look at this place, you suddenly realise why it's quite so valuable. Look at that port, those spaces. Look at those bays, natural defensive harbours, natural spaces you can get your gold ships, your ships loaded with silver or gold or other specie, to load up safely. And 2 exits so they can break out to sea. And you've got another space that you can put into as well, behind the Isle de Terra Roca, Terra Bomba. And, you know, this just gives you space. This just gives you an advantage. So what was the mission? Well, this was Vernon's third attempt at taking Cartagena de Indias. And taking it is a useful thing, if you can. Now, Leslie's just said the basic rule of thumb of 10 attackers per 1 defender applies especially when you're dealing with a prepared defensive position. Because as anyone who's ever tried to defend anything will tell you, a prepared defensive position always beats an unprepared defensive position. And if you're in a prepared defensive position, with nice lines of communication with your centre, so people can coordinate your reinforcements, and with everything worked out sensibly, you can do that. Add cannon without air and heavy artillery, it's 20 to 31. Yeah, it gets worse the more you look at it. And they've built defences. They've built defences. And that's this. Of course this place was defended. It was defended before. This is the thing. Yes, it's a prize. Yes, it's valuable. Taking Havana possibly would have been easier. Why? Because you attacked here so many times, they're on red alert, they've actually pulled some troops from Havana. Or some troops which could have gone to Havana have gone here. Because you attacked it twice already the previous year, and now you're back with a lot of troops. It's kind of obvious where you're going to go next. In fact, attacking anywhere else but here would have been a sensible option. But Vernon is not sensible. Vernon's not. And please don't get me wrong. One of the problems you have when you're doing this sort of discussion, we're talking about this, especially, is we're talking about an admiral on possibly his worst day. This is the same admiral who led the capture of Gibraltar. This is an admiral who had, well, when I said led the capture of Gibraltar, he'd been under George Rook and Byng at the time, but he'd been one of their senior officers helping them in pretty much the front. He'd been involved in the Battle of Malaga. He'd been involved in the siege of Barcelona. He had experience. And he takes part in the Battle of Portobello, which was a British victory in November 1739. He'd done well there, and that had been against Spain. And he would also be the same commander who would turn up, and this is just disturbing, with pretty much the same force after losing at Cartagena, goes, rests up, and tries to attempt to take Havana at this point. And they lose again. They lose again. It's just, he is not an amphibious warfare commander. He's an okay naval commander. He is not good when it comes to amphibious warfare. He had been the MP for Penryn and Ipswich as well, though. We'll leave that to one side. Leslie, don't take this the wrong way, but your criteria for almost every operation is very good NCOs. I can, you can tell which nation you served because of your obsession with having good quality NCOs. There are some nations whose armed forces literally run from them. Now, the British objective is quite simple. Capture and retain Spain's 4 ports in the Caribbean basin. But, as said, Cartagena and Indias is one of those critical points. Havana is the next one. These 4 ports, the other ports after them, quite easy to see if you go to this earlier map. Because it's where Vernon has gone round. You capture them, you have an advantage. What would have probably been sensible would be to descend on all 4 at the same time with different forces and overwhelm them that way. Not to do this. Were any of them court-martialed afterwards? No. No, they weren't. Now, if we're going to talk about Cartagena and Indias itself, it had been founded in 1553, officially. There probably were settlements in the area beforehand. And it was the capital of the province, Cartagena, and its fortifications had been worked on since 1533. I mean, yeah, you're dealing with some parts of the forts are over 200 years old. So yeah, this place has been a focus of Spanish defense and security for a while. The Spanish personnel know the terrain very well, and they know what they're defending. It had been captured in 1585 by Sir Francis Drake, of course. And then that's when it gets its really big upgrade under Battista Antonelli, who was the Italian engineer. But it had been sacked again in 1697 by a French privateer. But even before Lezo's upgrades and fortifications over the last year, the fortifications had been defenses completely renewed under Juan de Jerez Sotomayor up till 1732. Now, that's the Caribbean, bleeding up to the west of the city. This is north-south relation. The bay to the south has the Boca Chica, the little mouth, and the Boca Grande, the big mouth. And there's also lagoons and various other things that's pointed out earlier. So the walls of the city have roughly 300 guns on them, even before Lezo's modifications and taking some guns from his ships. Moats, gates, and bastions guarded it. Suburbs were also surrounded by an extra moat. So you had the moats of the city. You had the city had a moat and moats and gates and bastions. And that's where roughly a little over half the cannon were mounted. And then the suburbs also have their own moat. And then the city, on a hill about a quarter mile south of the city, there's Fort San Lorenzo, which we've talked about before. That's the fort which I showed an earlier picture of, or rather the plan of. And the fort was felt to command the city itself and the plain around it because it's the highest position in the area. Now, the thing is, there's no fresh water sources outside of Cartagena and the fort itself in this area. And if you can land, the closest place you can land is a beach called Texar de Gracias, which will take you 3 miles, roughly, on a road to Fort Lazaro from most of the accounts I've seen. When I looked at the map, I did see it was roughly 3 miles. I'd say it was a little bit more than 3 miles, but they say 3 miles, so I'm going to go 3 miles. And yeah, this is a heavily defended base. I hope there aren't any Spanish speakers in the house. Thanks, Alta Gracias. My Spanish isn't that great. I haven't. I need to. The trouble is, every time I chat with my friend who's Spanish, she wants to practice her English. So I don't get to practice my Spanish, and it's been many, many years. So yeah, Latin was always more my one than Spanish. So let's consider the opening of the battle. They had all sorts of issues getting ready, and the Americans came from Jamaica to New York, and they had arrived in December 1740 in Jamaica. The British arrived in not long afterwards, all in Jamaica, and that's where they're really getting together. The British basically use Jamaica as their forward basing position, so everything is sailing there. The whole force suffers from manpower struggles. It meant that before they even launched, Cathcart had to deal with the fact that the Navy Walpole's government had forced 600 of his Marines, newly recruited troops, to be transferred to the men of war to provide 600 Marines aboard them. Because they didn't want to recruit even more Marines for the men of war, for the ships of the line. Jasmine, that depends. Is your moat a running water moat or is it a dry moat? Either are options. If you're presuming a moat is going to be, because it's already understood in this particular area exactly how bad still water, sitting water is. They do have ideas for how to deal with these things and how to get keep the water moving, and they do things to keep it moving. Not always successfully, but they have plans. Now, as said, a lot of senior officers die. Wentworth, it's worthwhile noting, has no previous combat command experience, is what they nicely described as, but basically means he hasn't done anything. He's a lieutenant general who has no experience. They added 300 slaves as a work battalion, which caused additional arguments because many were not unsure about taking slaves with them, and the advantages and disadvantages of it, and how it could cause trouble with the discipline in the men, was what they seemed to be worrying about. There was also upset in Jamaica about taking 300 slaves. Now, there was a brief skirmish with a French naval squadron, and pretty much the Spanish knew that the British were coming. And they also knew that May is when the rainy season begins, and the sickly season then lasts from May to November. So if you don't get the fighting done by May, you should leave, because you'll be destroyed by sickness. Everyone knows that. Now, I would say there is a dispute going on in the Spanish High Command at this point between Liza and Slava. Slava prefers a more, how do I put this, weaker forward defense to allow the enemy to sap their strength, taking the defenses, whereas Lezo wants to fight for every single line. So Lezo wants to fight hard, reinforce and withdraw between lines. So basically have the full force confronting the enemy at every single line of fortification. Everything he can there, and then withdraw in. Slava thinks you should have those outer fortifications weakly crewed, weakly manned, and so you lose less in those positions. It's different modus operandi. Both can hopefully lead you to the same thing, but again, it's about buying time. Les's is the one which is more likely to cost you losses, but also more likely to cost the enemy a lot more hard, make the enemy's life a lot harder. It also means you have to do withdrawals under fire a lot to withdraw your positions, your personnel to safety behind the next line of fortification, and you're going to tire your own force out a lot more. But you're going to cost the enemy a lot more forces, and the more wounded you inflict on them, the more you're going to sap their strength, especially because dead people, they're annoying. But wounded are still taking up supplies, are still requiring feeding, but more importantly, they now require other people to take care of them. So if you wound an enemy, that takes out 2 enemy soldiers. You kill just 1. So there's this debate going on in the Spanish forces. Which one do they do? Eslava wins, because, well, if we go back to the commanders, there's a reason why Slava wins. Look, what is Sebastian de Slava? He's the Viceroy of New Granada. He's a Viceroy. Lezo, just the Governor General. I'm sorry. Viceroy trumps Governor. Even though that's the Viceroy and that's the Governor. I really wouldn't want to be in a fight with this guy. The fact he's still alive after taking the number of wounds he has suggests he's really quite good at it. Always be wary of old men in a profession where the people die young. Be even more scared of old women than them. So that being said, the opening battle. It's the attack on Fort San Lucia, or at Boca Chica. Now, the British decide to continue forward, and when they do eventually get there, they decide they're going to make decisions by councils of war. They're not even going to appoint an overall commander amongst themselves. They are going to make decisions by democratic vote of a council of war of all the constituent commanders. Please put in the chat whether you think that is a good and effective command strategy. Having everyone vote as to, in council of war, as to what they want to do. Do we think it? Do we think it's a sensible strategy? Frigate no. Look, it's a very politically savvy one, because it means that if they're all taking counsel, this is why no one can be held accountable at the end. No one can be court-martialed for loss, because everyone agreed it was a council of war. Now, please note, this is what Fort San Luis looks like today. It's what it looks like today. Not how it looked like at the time. This is how it looks like today. But it gives you a nice idea of the land around it. It gives you a nice idea of what kind of position we're talking about, what kind of area. And you can even see the coast road going, which would traditionally sort of goes past it. And this is what we're talking about. As effective as Satan's chocolate fire guard. Cartagena, I love that. No. Oh, war by committee, yeah. Look, you can have war by committee when you're talking about the strategic level of governance back at home. When you're in the field commanding and you need to make a decision right now, yeah. Doesn't really work. Now, one of the reasons why they have approached a council of war approach is because, as I said, the strongest personality is Vernon. If you actually appoint a ground forces commander officially, and they officially start running things as a ground forces commander, that then becomes a competing personality for Vernon to deal with. As long as they're doing war by committee, Vernon has a voice. Now, Cartagena has some lovely geographical defences. Apart from having the ocean, where the shore and surf are so rough that there's no attempt to try and land from the sea with the technology at the time, the Boca Grande is too shallow to allow the passage of ocean-going vessels, and the Boca Chica, that's a small channel, was the deep draft passage, but it runs between two narrow peninsulas, and on one side has Fort San Luis and 49 cannon, 3 mortars, and a garrison of 300 soldiers under Carlos Decino. And there's a boom which stretches from there to the Sun Peninsula, of which was Fort San Jose, with 13 cannon and 150 soldiers. And also at Boca Chica, there is the 6 Spanish ships of the line. So basically, if you're going to try and take that, you have a problem. And when you have a problem like that, what you need is a decisive command structure, which is going to make a decision. What the British have instead is a conversation. A long conversation. Now, don't worry, Vernon's having a conversation with the Spanish, because before they decide, even while they are still debating aboard ships where to disembark, what to do, Vernon uses the bombard ships and the ships of the line to silence the batteries of the fortresses of Chamba, San Felipe, and Santiago, and to attack the fort of Punta Albinos in Barrow Peninsula. And, they are planning to land with grenadiers to try and near Boca Chica to try and take forts. When they finally do this, they do land with 300 grenadiers, and, well, they actually do well because, as said, Anslava had said, let's weekly demand the crew the outer forts. So Santiago and San Felipe, the two forts, managed to, how do I put this, suffer 120 casualties when some British ships turn up and start blasting them, and they decide to leave them. Although the British weren't without losses at this point. HMS Shrewsbury lost 100 killed and wounded as Fort San Luis opened fire on her. And Fort San Luis was actually well defended at this point. They landed the grenadiers eventually at night. They tried landing in the morning, it didn't work, so they landed them that night. And on the 22nd of March, they land the rest of the forces. So basically, during night, they land 300 grenadiers. The grenadiers, of course, are chosen because they are tall. Grenadiers were chosen to be as tall, big men because, of course, they were supposed to throw grenades, and there are various grenade throwing systems. But the thing is, more importantly, they were chosen because they were tall, big, tall, large-looking people. That's why they chose grenadiers. That was one of their criteria. So landing 300 of them makes sense. You're landing 300 of your biggest, best-trained troops. They're landed at night. They secure the early landing space, and then the rest of the troops start landing in after them. Now, here's where you get to really interesting things, because I talked about 3,600 American troops. Well, only roughly 300 of them are actually landed as part of the land force. The remaining 3,300 were dispersed amongst the ships of the line and other vessels of Vernon's fleet because he'd lost sailors and he needed those personnel. So you've lost 3,300, over 25% of your fighting force to reinforce the navy. Which is good for Vernon, because it gives him a stronger fleet. It's terrible for the army. Because you weren't exactly going in with overwhelming numbers in the first place, were you? And you've lost 25% of your force before you even fought a battle. Now, after they've managed to land the troops ashore, they then start to land the artillery, and the army starts to build a camp. The camp is focused on Fort San Luis, and they set up some 24-pounder guns taken from the ships, and they start battering the fort. That's 24-pounders. Close range on land, they're able to do some severe damage. And 5 ships, the Boyne, the Prince Frederick, the Hampton Court, the Tilbury and Suffolk, were led by Commodore Richard Lestock, attempted to also attack the fort from the shoreline, but honestly, they make little to no impression, and 3 ships are so heavily damaged that they are de facto disabled. So the Royal Navy's really acquitting itself well in this operation. It's also one of those historical events which usually people give the idea of warships can never beat a land fort. Really? They can't? Well, oh yes, you took wooden ships and you took them right up to a land fort and you tried to batter it into submission using those. Oh yeah, maybe not the smartest move. Maybe this is why you have mortar, why you have bombard ships. No. Stop using the ships in line. Use the mortar ships. But no, they're not. It starts giving me a headache at a certain point in this battle. Oh. There are... No, no, 6831. No, Dr. Clarke, War by Committee is as dumb as the banks are today about IT security. No. War by Committee is dumber than even the IT security of banks. Charles Miller, War by Committee followed by Tried as a Committee? Nope. You see, the thing is, if you're doing War by Committee, that means you all have your own patrons. And if they can't separate you off from one another to focus on one of you getting the blame, then your patrons could all equally get the blame, and they don't want to get the blame for promoting such dullards. So they're going to cover it up. That's the advantage of War by Committee. Anyway. After 3 days of the land artillery firing day and night, they managed to make a breach in the main fort. Amazingly, you should never have brought the ships in. You've landed artillery, you've landed guns, let them do their job. Stop trying to jump in, Navy. Really stop trying to jump in. But they did. And once they managed to bash in and make their way in, well, part of the fleet comes up to try and assist, and another part of the fleet goes off to engage the Spanish ships. Lezo scuttles too, and the Glacier he sets on fire. The reason why he scuttled these ships? Well, because they partially blocked the channel, and whilst the Glacier was captured by the Royal Navy before it could sink, it was a close run thing, and if all three had sunk, it would have completely blocked the channel. Gustav Kurt, strong 1800s Dardanelles expedition vibes. Oh, if you really want to go and have fun, go and look at some of Drake's amphibious assaults in operations in Spain. Seriously, a raid on Cadiz, etc. is another good example of this. I hate to say this, but the British have form in this area of repeating this mistake repeatedly. I just said repeating repeatedly, didn't I? Yeah, this is the trouble. This battle is just so completely... Basically, every rule you have for sensible conduct of operations, they managed to break in this operation. Every single rule. It's just, they're like certain nations with what those nations term the Geneva Checklist. So, this point, you have a choice. You can try and advance through the forest a bit and undercover, or you can advance on the breach directly. Guess what they do? They go straight for the breach. But the thing is, once they get there, they're lucky. The Spanish had already retreated. And so, what do the British do? How do the British work this out, you know? Because they've managed to make it into the harbour. So what do? Well, they don't take the army straight across. No. They re-embark the landing force and they enter the harbour. They've lost roughly 400 killed. Okay? 122 enemy action. 250 to yellow fever and malaria. There are 600 sick and hospitalised. So there are 1,200 troops alone already down. So the army is, remember, down 3,300 personnel into the Navy, and now they're down a further 1,200. So the army force is down by roughly 5,500 at this point. 4,500. Sorry, I misspoke. 4,500. So I knew there was something wrong because I'm going. On my notes says a third. I just said, oh yeah, I added on an extra 1,000 for some reason. So they are down. More than a third of their forces have gone. Not Drake's fault though. Gustav Kleist, no, it's not Drake's fault. But honestly, there's enough blame to go around in that one. There is enough blame to go around. Now, if you don't mind, I'm sorry I've run out of Iron Brew, so I'm going to quickly wander in that direction and grab another bottle. Because I need it to get through this battle.
Yes, you're gorgeous, and you're a poodle.
You're a good boy. You're a good boy. Let's see. Do we need more food? We've got plenty down there. Okay. Oh. The one thing I wish didn't happen is that in UK hospitals, when you go to most of the ones in Cornwall are free car parking, right? But yeah, Trelisk costs enough. I spent my own brew budget for the next 2 weeks, but they did the right thing about after my sister. They looked after her. So far, I would say the hospitals in Cornwall have been very, very good. I have managed to tour around most of the A&E, so if ever you're in Cornwall, I can highly recommend them. Check what you're going to, though, and work out whether what you're going to is whether they can deal with what you've got. There are minor units, there are minor treatment centres, there are critical units, and Trelisk is the truer one, and they're the really big ones. So if you think you have anything massively wrong, Trelisk. But I will say this, they've got some great face people. Because my poor sister went in, she'd lost roughly 2 centimetres of her lip. She'd managed to scrape off, falling on the ground. She literally just fell over. And they managed to sort her out that evening. They had a specialist on duty, they had consultants on duty. And this was just a random Wednesday night. And they sorted it out. They had all the people there. How much was parking? Yeah, 6 bottles of iron brew. So yeah, that's how much parking cost. What did she trip over? Herself. She literally just seems to have tripped over in the road. But luckily for these people, they are part of Fort San Lucas at Boca Chica. They are now on to the main fortifications. And I want to introduce you to Fort San Lorenzo. Fort San Lazaro. Here's the question. Does this look like the kind of fortification you can take half-heartedly or with minimal resources? Oh, just tripped. My sister's dyspraxic. And sometimes she can literally just trip. And if she's on site, she'll be wearing the safety gear and all the stuff she needs to be. She was just walking a dog. She was just walking a dog and tripped over. Oh yeah, it's just a used bike dog. Yeah, this is the kind of place where you look at and go, do I have at my back roughly 15 to 20,000 regulars, a whole battalion of Royal Engineers, some good artillery regiments, and a nice load of mortar ships? Do I? Yes, she will be getting new shoes, though. If I had a P-52, sure. Yeah, that is the other thing. My sister will be getting some new shoes, because hers are pretty darn worn, and that doesn't help her. You wagging your tail? You wanting some patting? Ah, you're such a poodle. So, now, what did the British do? The Spanish have just withdrawn inside their main fortifications. They are theoretically on the run. What should you do at this point? Have another Council of War! Yay! It's another Council of War. Oh. So, thank you. Another Council of War. What are they going to decide? What do you think they're going to think? Well, looking at this, there's a reason I asked you the question of, would you think attacking this? They decide on looking at it that the obvious thing is that as the Spanish have concentrated at Fort San Lorenzo, they should attempt to isolate Cartagena from the land by assaulting Fort San Lorenzo. Lazaro. Specifically, Vernon challenged Wentworth's martial prowess. He pretty much called him a coward. And he also managed to force him to do this, but also, at the same time, refused to support the attack with the fleet due to the depth of the harbour. So, he said he can't help him with the attack because the harbour is too shallow, so he can't get that close, so he's going to have to do it himself. But, of course, did they hate their troops? They hated something. They hated each other. They hated everyone, you know. They just hated it. And so, this is what they're doing. They're planning to attack Fort San Lazaro with pretty much infantry alone and no fleet support. Other than, no firepower support, other than what they can manage to get with them and set up. Hello. By the way, the only British engineer with the expedition, they'd only brought one engineering officer with them. One officer of engineers had been brought, had died at Fort San Luis. So there's no one who's qualified or knows how to construct a battery to breach the walls. It's a really well-organised attack. They had one engineer with them. Case of the greater enemy is your own command. Possibly. I'm going to put the poodle in the garden because he just went to the door. Okay. Ronnie going garden. Did you hear? I will say this. For those wanting a happy watch this evening, something which is going to bring them light to their life, this is not it. This is a walking depression. The command structure here and what they get up to is just, oh my lord, there was an open gate of what to do and an open gate of what not to do, and you managed to wander once again through the gate of what not to do. Every single time. It's like they're attracted to it or attached to it. They can't seem to avoid doing what they're not supposed to do. If there's a stupid option, they will take it. Now afterwards, Werner would say he believed the Spanish were on their run because they retreated to their well-organised, well-built, strongly positioned defensive formations. Yeah, this is a sign of an enemy being on retreat. When they withdraw inside that and going, here, come get us. Not even the bright idea, Fairy. This is not even the bright idea, Fairy. This is something. I'm picturing the Spanish commander watching the attack unfold, staring bemusedly and being torn between not believing his good luck and wondering, where is the trap? They can't be that stupid. I think probably Lizzo was spending the whole time going, they can't possibly do this! They can't possibly. Now, with the British forces, Lezo starts strengthening Fort San Lorenzo by digging trenches around it and clearing the field of fire to approach. He has had time to do this, but he's got time to finish it off because the British are taking so long. And he's holding the fort himself. He put 650 soldiers in the trench. He garrisons the fort with another 300. Keeps a reserve of 200 Marines and soldiers ready to support them. And worse, the British pick the beach. That means they have to pass a narrow defile. And in this scenario, the Spanish managed to ambush them and cause trouble before retreating. So pretty much, they have been goaded, or rather their commander has been goaded into launching this attack with no support, no proper engineering, nothing that can actually do the walls or actually support any attack. And guess what bright idea Wentworth has? He will launch a coup de main, a single strike that will take out Fort San Luis, Fort San Lazaro. He will launch a single strike. And this will be carried out at night. He will attack the walls, which have not been breached, at night, and therefore he will take them in one blow. It gets even better. His plan is to attack the northern side of the fort, because that side is facing Cartagena, and in the dark, the guns at Cartagena would not be able to give supporting fire to the fort, for fear of hitting the fort. Plus, the southern side of the fort has the lowest and most vulnerable walls, and so the Grenadiers could storm it. That is their idea. His literal thinking is, those are the lower walls, they won't fire me, so I can attack and take them. At night. My God. Depressing? What are you talking about? This is hilarious. Yeah. Slapstick comedy at its best at this point. These people are dying in it. Oh, it's just so bad. Oh, the ultimate forlorn hope. A night battle. Yeah, I know. Oh, it just gets worse. It just gets worse. And he's got Grenadiers in front as well. As we all know, whenever you want to do a night battle, you put light infantry at front. Not Grenadiers. Oh. But don't worry, for those thinking about a forlorn hope, he does arrange it. So, they planned to go in at midnight. But it took far too long to make the advance. So, it's only at 4 a.m., 0400 hours, on the 20th of April, 1741, that the forlorn hope of 50 volunteers, followed by 450 grenadiers, commanded by Colonel Winwood, start to make their advance. And then there's 1,000 men behind them under the command of Colonel Grant. And then there's Americans and some troops from the 34th and 36th regiments carrying scaling ladders and wool packs so that they can use them to help them get over. The wool packs, by the way, would fill in the trenches. So you'd fill in the trench with wool packs, and then you'd go over with the scaling ladders and you scale the wall. And there's a further 500 Marines under command of a Colonel Wolfe. Now, the thing was, it's made worse, okay? So, with all this, you think they've done topographical searching, they've done all those things, surely they have a good map. They don't. They decide to depend for their navigation in the dark on 2 Spanish deserters. I'm not sure if they were paid by Lezo to desert. I don't know what goes on. But all I know is they take them to the wrong places. Wynard is led to a very steep approach. And as they scramble up the slope, it seems that the Spanish are ready. And they start doing a volley musket of fire from the Spanish entrenchments. And as the Grenadiers try to deploy into line, advance up there, trading fire, they get into trouble. Grant gets killed, i.e. the colonel of the main force, that's supposed to be on the main body behind them. And his troops basically don't know who's in charge, because who's left are 2 captains and 2 lieutenants who don't know what they're doing, because his major dies very quickly as well after him, I think, is the scenario that happens. And the Americans drop the ladders and try and take cover, because they've not been armed, they just literally got the ladders. And the ladders, it turns out, they brought forward were short by 10 feet of how long they need to be. And then as the sun rises, an hour later, at roughly 0500 hours, the guns at Cartagena open fire. It's only at 0800 hours, after 3 hours of being blasted right up the backside by Spanish artillery, and as he's watching a Spanish force of infantry coming from the gates of Cartagena itself, which is threatening to cut him off from the ships, that Wentworth orders a retreat. At no point did he apparently consider going forward and leading the attack himself, which he'd ordered. No, he's just leaving this to the officers who are there and who are dying. From the 2,000 troops he'd sent in there, at least 600 troops had died. By this point, the effectives he has available, i.e. not sick or dead, are 3,200 personnel. He's down to roughly 25% of his force. Something I joked about Lieutenant being in overall command. That might not be a joke after all. The lieutenants might have done a better job. With this going on, and, well, how do I put it politely? Unsurprisingly at this point, we have a withdrawal! Finally, someone's actually had a sensible idea, but don't remember they do go on to Havana after this. They do go on to Havana after this. It's not sensible. It's not sensible. There is some fun thing going on here. Charles Mirror, at least they didn't have the Roman practice of decimation after failure. No, but honestly, I think the Romans would have wouldn't have decimated their troops for this. They'd have decimated their commanders. Also, I'm just remembering through history the Roman response to when they had people trying to do command by committee. Yeah, those battles didn't go well. They learned that lesson quite quickly. So, Lezo's plan had been the whole way along to try and buy time until the rainy season began, and then the tropical downpours and disease would devastate any enemy force. He was incredibly aided in this by the fact that Wentworth and Vernon hated each other, were easily goaded by each other, spent most of the time plotting against each other, and neither could decide who was in charge. And the fact that the British command structure spends its entire time trying to govern by committee and not actually working out who was actually supposed to be in charge and running things. You have to give full credit to Lezo's defensive plans, the fact that he managed to build them as strong as he had and managed to make them as capable as he had. By the 7th of May, they have another council. They pretty much, well, that's by the 7th of May. They have a council on 20th of April, and they're gone by the 7th of May. They're pretty much, they are pretty much all ready to go, and they're gone by mid-May. By the 7th of May, when they are packing up, they have 1,700 men fit for service in land forces. And no more of those than 1,000 of those were in condition to fight the enemy. The rest, it's just, within a month of leaving Cartagena, another 1,100 had died. It's just so much disease. So much suffering. Lezo actually dies a few weeks later after falling ill from the plague from the unburied bodies. So he isn't around to really enjoy his victory. 50 ships are lost, damaged, disabled, abandoned due to lack of crews. Of the American soldiers who'd come, only 300, including Lawrence Washington, returned home. Please note, Lawrence Washington renames his plantation, Virginia Plantation, Mount Vernon, after Admiral Vernon. I'm not sure whether that's a nice thing or a bad thing. What do we think? Do we think Lawrence Washington liked Admiral Vernon? Or do we think he was naming it as a memory of, this is how you don't lead. This is going to be a permanent example for me. Charles Muir, I don't think decimation would have really resulted in many people dying at this point. I think enough of them already died. Here's the joyous thing, though, okay? And the really funny thing. When the Spanish had retreated from the outer defensive points to the inner defensive points, to San Lazaro, Vernon had sent Captain Laws to Britain to inform King George of the entry into the inner bay. And so, they started minting these victory coins, showing the Navy's great victory. They also produced commemorative china. It's just a full smorgasbord of, we've won! Before they actually won. Now, traditionally, the British have blamed the loss and failure of the force on the loss of General Charles Cathcart and the fact that United leadership was gone when he was gone. I won't say that's not correct. That's not incorrect. It was certainly part of it. I'd say part of it was also that you sent a grossly inadequately organised force for the subject. I think even if you have a good general, if you only have one engineer, you've not got enough. Now, yes, I do realise some had died on the way. But perhaps we'll add that into your thinking. If you are presuming you're going to lose roughly some of the spread them out onto different ships, so they're not going to be all subject to the same illnesses. B, take enough of them. Take 2 dozen of them, 3 dozen of them, 4 dozen of them. Take some sodding engineers, because you need artillery. They might have been able to crack this fort if they got some actual artillery ashore and been able to support it with proper batteries. But the fact they had one artillery engineer, one engineer to build the batteries required to support those guns, and he had died in taking the fort, which was at this place, which, as I've said earlier, didn't look like that at the time, looked like this. It's just, no. There are many reasons for the loss. The command structure, the lack of engineers, the, oh my god, can you not actually judge a height properly? Why are you building your ladders too short? Building ladders too long is far better than building ladders too short. First rule of building a siege ladder. It doesn't matter if it's too long, it does matter if it's too short. You don't estimate and cut down, you estimate and add up. Yes, you're attacking the south side. Yes, it's the shorter walls. Estimate it based on the long walls you can see, not to go think, oh, they're shorter, so it must be about that and not shorter. So make them 10, we'll make them this one, and then find out they're 10 foot shorter. Rather than being 15 foot lower, it turns out they're only 5 foot lower than the northern walls. Oh, great. And you know what's really worse? Okay, here's the worst thing that happens at. And this is where my ire for Vernon really starts to come in. Okay? When he's leaving, he sends a letter to the Lezo. This is the Spanish commander, the guy who's going to die not long later and long after. We have decided to retreat, but we will return to Cartagena after we take reinforcements in Jamaica. Which gives Lezo the opportunity to respond, in order to come to Cartagena, the English king must build a better, larger fleet, because yours is now only suitable for transport coal from Ireland to London. I'm not sure if he knew that coal was transported from London to Ireland at the time, or rather than the other way around, or what, but honestly, it's a line he apparently makes. And, yeah. You can find that in there's some pretty good books in Spanish, which I've got some. I'm not sure if they're official translations, but they're translations I got from friends when I taught this class into English, and I've got sections translated, and that's the translation I've got from one of them. I think it's El día que España derrota en Inglaterra. I think that's a 2005 book. I remember I got it in about 2010. So, yeah. The one really good thing for the British to come out of this battle, the really good thing in terms of consequences, is Robert Walpole's government collapses. Spain gets control, or keeps getting control of its colonies, yes. But Robert Walpole's government collapses because of this. Because of the losses, George II withdraws the Britain's guarantees of armed support for the Pragmatic Sanction, which is what ignites the War of the Austrian Succession. So this is why I consider the War of Austrian Succession more a consequence of the War of Jenkins' Ear than I do the War of Jenkins' Ear a part of the War of Austrian Succession, because it's because of its consequence from the Battle of Cartagena in Innis that Cartagena, the Indias, that the War of Austrian, that Britain withdraws its guarantees, and the War of Austrian Succession begins because it turns out that the Bourbon allies have allied with Prussia to move against the isolated Austria for their own, mostly for their own advantage in Italy. Mostly for their own advantage in Italy. And unsurprisingly, due to this, by the way, Wentworth and Vernon both blame each other, and they blame the failure of doing any other operations on the fact they've lost so many troops in Cartagena. And they are recalled in 1742. Admiral of the Fleet Chalna Ogle is one of the forgotten admirals of the Royal Navy, and he's one I'm going to be doing a video about at some point. Chalna Ogle is takes command. And he is a good officer. He goes on to become also a commander-in-chief of the North, but he is basically, he has to take command and bring the force back together. He is... Yeah. He is critical to operations, and he was actually there at the Battle of Cartagena, the Indias, but he doesn't really... Vernon doesn't really get into too much trouble. Well, Vernon doesn't really invite Ogle too much involved in things, so Ogle doesn't get into too much trouble. But yeah, so he becomes commander-in-chief of the Jamaica station and tries to sort things out. And one of the reasons I first learnt about this battle, even ages ago, was because Ogle is buried in St. Mary's Church in Twickenham. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know I did my bachelor's at St. Mary's University College in Twickenham. So I used to wander around the church, and it was kind of interesting when I found an admiral there who has a monument and all sorts of things. And it was kind of, oh, okay, let's look him up and find out what he was doing. Chalna Ogle. Oh, yes, or up to the Chalna Ogle. He's an interesting officer. Never wins a great victory, so doesn't get remembered, but actually does quite a decent job at various points. He's a workmanlike officer, is how I describe him. A workmanlike officer. By the time the Caribbean campaign really comes to an end, 90% of the army which had been dispatched had died from combat or sickness, vast majority from sickness in May 1742. It's just, yeah. Basically, Charles Knowles eventually comes out and takes over after Ogle, and he is doing raids on the Venezuelan coast and doing all sorts of raiding operations, but not really a lot is able to be done because they've lost so much forces. Unfortunately, the other consequence of this was that with the forces, the full 25% of the Royal Navy roughly being deployed to support Vernon's force in the Caribbean and still being out there, it meant the Royal Navy wasn't able to mount a strong enough Mediterranean squadron, so it couldn't prevent the Spanish from getting 25,000 troops to Italy between November and December 1741, which had a big impact on the Italian campaign, because 25,000 well-supplied Spanish troops turning up really does have the impact. Eventually, after Lestock gets back in the UK, he gets his ship sorted out, and the Royal Navy is able to reinforce the Mediterranean fleet and prevent further reinforcements. it turns into a bit of fight between the army and navy, and it still is something of a argument to this day, kind of like Gallipoli, kind of like other operations. I can honestly say it was both forces at fault. The Royal Navy needed to bring more mortar ships. They needed more bombard ships. They needed more of them to come in and support the army, to be able to get in close enough. If you're really going to find yourself dealing with shallow waters and unable to support the army, you need the ships which can come in and support the army and actually do the fighting. And the army needed to bring more engineering officers and more artillery officers. This was a force which was heading against a heavily fortified position and was completely the wrong force mix for it. You need more artillery. You need more hospital ships, definitely more to sustain it, more hospital supplies. But you also need more artillery, and you need to be able to use the artillery. I think Ogle did take out a pirate, but I'm not sure if it's B. Roberts. I'm not 100% sure, Ford. One of the interesting things was when there were all sorts of interesting discussions, even 2014, about it, because in 2014 Prince Charles, then now King Charles, actually visited Colombia and unveiled a plaque to the British casualties of the battle, because believe it or not, now post-independence Colombia tends to look back on the battle, because of the British involvement in their independence movement, as quite favourably on the British, but that led to complaints from the residents of the city that the Spanish defenders weren't mentioned on the plaque, and that it was near the statue of Lezo, and so they had to remove the plaque, even though it had already been vandalised. Ay, caramba. Basically, again, someone had a bright idea. The whole thing, though, with this entire scenario and the entire war of this battle is that I don't think command structure would have, Cathcart surviving actually saves things. I really don't. I wish it would save things, but I don't think it's going to, because how can it? How can it save things? How can he magically improve things? Matthew Keeling, for some reason you are being a Nightbot is getting upset with you. Oh, you're adding in too many full stops. Don't worry. Sorry, Nightbot thinks you're a there are some things set in to stop the various spammers coming in and trying to advertise mostly ladies, but some men of, let's say, negotiable company. And they usually somehow litter their spam with lots and lots of symbols, lots of spelling, lots of full stops, etc. And so Nightbot is triggered by that. So yeah. Life. It's fun. It is fun. So, I'm going to say any questions. I'm going to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it interesting. This is one of those battles which doesn't get talked about enough, and I do apologise if things haven't been covered in here. I will transfer them into the long patrol, which I will attempt to record probably tomorrow. I will attempt to record about 3 or 4 videos tomorrow, actually, because if I can record them tomorrow, then when I've got some support and assistance around tomorrow, then life will be a little bit easier for next week. Because, well, I think with the condition of my mother and sister, probably going to have to take the lead for, especially the stuff during the week when the dogs have both got vet trips next week. This one likes going to the vet. He gets hugs and told how beautiful he is. The corgi has white coat syndrome. He sees a vet and goes, ah! There's you going. The spambots sound more organised than British in this operation. Yes, they are. They are far more organised. It's just... I'm putting together a force of 12,000 soldiers. I'm only sending one engineer. What the... Why? Why? Why, Raleigh, would you do that? Even your namesake would... Oh, good Lord, you've come to me wafting your tail. You have just... You chemical factory! Oh, good God. Yeah, I'll put you in the garden and I'll come back and answer questions. Oh, my Lord. Oh, goodness gracious me. Okay, you're going garden. Poodle going garden. Oh, chemical factory. Absolute chemical factory. Where is it? There it is. Glade for all poodle stuff. Now that could have cleared out the fort. How does he do that? How? Paleontologist, if you compare this to the siege of Belmar, just how much Dakar was required to beat these forces they could not at Belmar? Honestly, look, if you consider they got 20 24-pounders ashore, and they took down that smaller fort. If they could have set up some batteries with probably 30 to 40, they could probably have taken San Lorenzo. And if they take San Lorenzo, then they can take Cartagena, because they can dominate it. But if you can't take San Lorenzo, you can't take Cartagena. And for that, you need artillery ashore to make the walls breachable. Once you've got a breach in the walls, then they're practical. Once you batter down the walls. If you don't batter down the walls, you can't do it. Not with the force they have available. Especially not with 2 short siege ladders. You, my dear Fluff, are a toxic factory. You are a toxic factory. I don't know what you've been eating. I really don't. I don't want to think what you've been eating. Panelist, do you think they could have been better off taking as many guns off the strip as possible? The trouble is they can't build supports for them. You can't... This is going to sound strange. The ground wasn't stable enough or firm enough for them to be able to do that with the guns. They had to build supports. They had to build positions for them. And for that, you need an engineer. Now, yes, you or I could possibly... We could probably... people could probably possibly judge it. They could possibly, try and figure it out and try and work it out, and take estimated guess and those things. And that is a chance. There's a chance you get it right. But there is also a chance that you get it completely wrong. And then your guns end up buried in the ground or go boom killing the crews and things like that. So this is why you need to actually have the engineers to build the things. You might love me. You might be very friendly. You might be trying to tell me how gorgeous and how wonderful I am. And how wonderful you are. That doesn't mean you're getting Vicky's. No. No. Not happening. Not after that. No. Good stuff, kids. The question, whose bright idea was it to send out the siege force without a sizable engineer component? At least they had plenty of guns in their fleet. It was the army. No. It was the army. They basically didn't assign the forces. As said, if you consider what they'd done earlier, they'd assigned Chelsea pensioners to Chelsea invalids. No! Stop that. Stop it. They'd assign invalids from Chelsea Hospital to the Anson's voyage. This one, they are supposed to organise themselves and assign engineers. They're the ones who decide the force. They're the ones who decide the land forces involved. The thing is, paleontologists, you're not wrong. The Navy will do that. But the thing is, when they're taking them forward, there are engineers deciding the positions. They're taking them forward too. There are often engineers helping design the roads, design the position, ways they get them up there. So the engineers are important. The Navy will take them forward. The Navy will man the guns. They will happily do that. And that is the basis of the fact of the lack of artillery they're taking forward. The Navy are offering to man the guns quite happily. The thing is, though, the Navy won't build the batteries. That's not their job. That's not their skill set. There was arguments about whether or not afterwards whether carpenters could have been set ashore to do it, but it's not really they're carpenters. They are designed to work with ships. Unless you're going to start building ships ashore, that's not really going to work. The Navy will happily help with moving the guns. They're not going to be able to build the positions. They're not going to be able to build them for them. Even Chaos was more organised. Chaos has always been more organised. Poodle W name may have turned about. Yeah, it would have done. Yeah. Well, yeah, the Royal Navy, if you've got soaring trees and hauling the artillery, that's woodwork, and that's the Royal Navy's skill set. The Royal Navy has lots of carpenters, they have lots of people who are capable, who are very experienced at chopping wood, they have lots of tools for that. They don't have the tools and experience to build shore-based battery positions, artillery positions. That's what the Army's engineers are for. And by the way, you might say the Royal Navy's learnt from this, and there is a reason why the Royal Marines have a commando regiment of engineers and a commando logistics sort of force, and both of them are heavily Royal Marine as well as Army. They are a mixture in their emphasis in training, and they're integrated into the brigade, so they cannot be pulled away. But that was a legacy realistically of World War II. But it was also a legacy to an extent of the formations which the Royal Navy tried to put together in the 1920s and 30s as part of the mobile naval basing with the experience of World War I. And it's been an ongoing issue for the Royal Navy in getting enough engineers assigned from the Army to support the Army side of amphibious operations. Thanks. I thought that the pension is only there to fill the gap. No, literally, the army was supposed to assign 500 soldiers to Anson's voyage. They assigned 500 personnel from the Chelsea pensioners. Literally, that's what happened with Anson's voyage. And as said, only roughly 240 of them showed up. Oh yeah, the Battle of Monongalia is, an interesting battle. It's a very interesting battle, especially when you consider some of the later things that happened with those tribes. Well, yeah, but that's how they built the things for for dealing the first fort. It had been Royal Navy carpenters, but they'd been led by an Army engineering team, which knew what to do, and could tell them where to go, where to do, and how to do the work. But it was a case of, afterwards, well, how do we balance this? What do we do? Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? Hello. Down you get. Is this going to be stable on the land available? How do we judge the land? Because people are thinking, well, surely carpenters know what to do to balance the guns. They do. But they don't know what quality the land is, and whether that will take it. Leave. It could look fine to them, but actually might not be fine. No. Stop this. You behave very well normally. Why you're playing up now, I'm not sure. Yes. Stop it. You got your treat for going in the garden. You're being a well-behaved boy. Carry on being well-behaved and stop being naughty. There's lots of in theory good plans, but the trouble is, plans if they're good in theory but don't work in reality aren't good plans. A plan which is good on paper but doesn't work in reality is not a good plan. It's a plan which they didn't think through enough. Because that plan in reality which you're talking about really required cavalry outside running interference. It really required cavalry scouts out making sure they had a proper cordon to maneuver through. Oh, BT could actually probably made it better. Because at least if BT's there, there's in the nicest way, if BT was there and in charge as an admiral, as a 4-star, he'd have been in overall command. So it actually would have been better. That sounds scary to say, but it would have been better because there would have been one person in charge. BT was actually quite good at those sort of things. Yeah. There isn't a plan or execution. In a nice way, there isn't much of a plan in this case, let alone execution of one. This is really not a good battle. It's really not a good battle. Yes, but the thing you have to remember is the Royal Navy does learn, but it takes a while for them to learn. This is 1740s. By the 1780s, they're doing a far better job, usually. Usually. And please note when I say usually. Right. No plan lasts beyond. No, but plans can set you up for beyond first contact, and that's the trouble. A sensible plan takes into account there's going to be first contact, and where is first contact going to be. Haunting parallels to New Orleans. There's haunting. New Orleans is an interesting operation, as I've discussed before. Honestly, the first attack was more of a, oh, good lord, we're doing this well. We weren't expecting it. It's almost a reconnaissance in force. The follow-on attack which was coming was going to be the real sledgehammer, and that would have broken New Orleans, but it never hit. The war peace happened, and so it didn't happen. And yeah, reconnaissance in force is a common practice. Best plans expect not to work, but you plan for your failure. Yeah. That's pretty much it, and that's the trouble. This plan, there's no give in this plan. One engineer, that works if everything goes to plan, but it's not going to go to plan, so you need to have spares. You're sending 12,000 troops as it is. You're honestly telling me that sending six engineers rather than one is going to break the bank? Being good boy now. Good boy. You need a breath mint. You really do sometimes. What have you been eating? Anyway, with that all being said, as I said, I'm going to go sort out the girls, and then I'll be on Discord in a bit. Shouldn't be too long, but yeah, I will be on Discord and will happily answer questions for a while. This video has gone on longer than I expected to. I expected it to be roughly 2 hours. I've taken roughly 2 hours and 40. So yeah, not quite to the 3 hour mark. But But normal time is roughly 3.5 hours, so it's a little bit shorter than normally. But thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for watching the channel and liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you for all your kindness in making the channel possible. Hope you enjoyed this evening, and as said, I'll be on Discord for a chat in a bit. In the chat. I'm sure until I get there, the very nice admins will keep all the chat going. And yeah, thank you for being here. And I hope the video's gone well tonight and it's been not interrupted itself. Good insights about why they didn't remove the guns from the ships. Yeah, there's no point taking the guns off the ships if you can't use them. And one of the things forgotten is the engineers often also have to build the systems which they use to get the troops get the guns ashore, because the guns can't always be just taken up the beach or wheeled up the beach. You need to build something. You might have to build something to get them on get them onto the land, and then have to get them to where they need to be. They need to be sighted and sight the batteries, and then the Navy will fire them. The Navy will crew them. The Navy will help build the batteries, as long as you have someone to tell them what to do. Good boy. Barring stinking me out at the end, you've been broadly, and a little bit naughty at the end, you've been broadly speaking very well behaved. Thank you for that. Now sit down and we'll finish the video off. And then we'll go check on the girls. So thank you very much everyone. Hope you enjoyed. As said, the long patrol will be more practiced, slightly less reading on notes hopefully, and better. But yeah, thank you. Hope you enjoyed us, and thank you. Take care. Forgot coming up next week we have it's the 6.6 fleet, which I have not written because I'm planning on rewriting it on the well, I've written it, but don't like the version I've written, so I'm going to rewriting it on Wednesday. So it hasn't been rewritten, but it is hopefully still going to be recorded again tomorrow. So hopefully all will be done tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and have a nice evening. Thank you to both YouTube and Twitch for all the chat and for being here and supporting the channel. And thank you for helping the channel grow in both cases. Take care.